Crime in the Elizabethan era was very different from modern day. The crimes, if observed by modern-day people, would be thought as very silly, and the punishments would be thought to be over the top. Crime was split into three categories: treason, felonies, and misdemeanors. Additionally, treason was split into two categories: high treason and petty treason. High treason was when someone threatened the life of the people in power or sabotaged the rules constructed by the monarchy. Punishments for high treason is the most gruesome of all. The person who committed this act would be drawn, hanged, and quartered. To go more into detail about this punishment, the person would be dragged by a horse to where they will be hung until half dead. Then, they would go to the execution place where they would be disemboweled, take out their intestines, and after that they would be quartered, cut into 4 pieces. Quartering is either done physically by a knife, or 4 pieces of their body, arms and legs, would be tied around each horse, and the horses would go in the opposite direction, ripping apart the person into 4 sections. High treason punishments were all done publicly. In fact, the south end of the London Bridge still displays heads on a stick from the executions that took place in this era. Petty treason is when someone threatens a person whom they are supposed to show obedience to. Remember, in this era, women were not equal to men. Therefore, if a woman were to commit an act that is unforgiving to her superior, in other words, her husband, the punishment would be death. Usually the punishment for this act would be burning at the stake. Petty treason can also be done by a servant not being obedient to their master. The next category after treason are felonies. Felonies are when someone commits murder, assault, witchcraft, or property crimes such as robbery. Other peculiar crimes that fits under felonies were hunting at night. The penalty for most cases of felonies would be death. Executions would be done publicly, like being hanged, for example. Some felony cases would be lessened to a smaller punishment, like cutting off fingers, although usually they would cut something a little less essential, like someone's ears. Ironically, since public executions are wildly popular, many pickpocketers are drawn in by the large crowds. The final category of crime is misdemeanors. Misdemeanors is everything other than the crimes talked about in treason and felonies. A couple examples of misdemeanors would be petty theft and vagabondage, which is people who travel from place to place. Petty theft is theft under 12 pence, and the punishments for petty theft would be branding the letter T on thumbs to show that they are a person who have stolen before. Usually the branding helps judges to see if the person has committed the act before. People who wander from place to place is usually run after by town officials. Typically, convicted misdemeanor crimes would be punished by being restrained in stocks publicly, and this usually can greatly hurt them by other people in town who wish to hurt them. Another common punishment for some facing misdemeanors is someone getting publicly whipped. Other crimes that were considered misdemeanors were wandering drunk, which led to stocks or wearing a barrel. If someone were to cheat a customer, they would either face a pillory, stocks, or finger pillory, which was a piece of wood that slammed in the middle of a person's joint. Gossiping was dealt with by placing a cage contraption around someone's head, forcing metal spikes to go inside someone's mouth. Any movement can cause severe injury inside the mouth. Over-talkative women was shockingly a crime in this era, and the punishment sentence of this crime would be a chair where the woman sat with a lever to control the ducking tool, as they liked to call it back then. The woman would be lowered into water, and in some cases, the woman would drown. Although misdemeanors had many crimes to fit, the punishments are better than death.
Punishments, crimes, and laws also varied based on personal social status. They were split into 2 classes, nobles and commoners. Nobles could be granted trial and plead in front of a judge with the possibility of being let go with a bail, fine, or lighter punishment. Commoners, however, were usually immediately taken to a holding cell where they would wait to be punished, in front of an audience for entertainment or in private. However, there were also laws for extremely poor commoners. This social class usually left them to be humiliated, whipped, and beaten if they were caught asking for money or goods. Because lawyers were expensive and exclusive, most commoners could not afford them, and they were reserved specifically for nobles. The Elizabethan court system was a complicated and intricate one. The system of law was divided into two sections, civil and common. Each of these branches was also divided into either canon, statute, customary, or salic laws. Courts dealt with the offenders based on severity and geographic proximity. There were local, manorial, national, criminal, consistorial, and maritime courts. Civil law was the set of rules that dealt with non-criminal matters like domestic problems, contractual issues, etc. Common law dealt with criminal matters like theft, murder, treason, etc. Within these branches, there were the canon, statute, customary, and salic laws. These were different sets of rules that were written by different groups. For example, canon law was a set of laws written by the church leadership that helped govern their members and followers.
The courts were also very different from modern court systems. The courts met either twice a year, which were called assizes, or 4 times a year, which were called general quarter sessions. More important cases were taken care of in assizes, while quarter sessions dealt with lesser crimes and regulated by lower-level officials. The assizes in particular were known for dealing out very harsh and painful punishments. However, again, only nobles were granted and could afford trials at all. Commoners rarely could gain the financial stability and social stability to be given the gift of trial. These trials were usually overseen by the queen, and as such, the court buildings were mobile and wherever the queen happened to be. However, pettier crimes such as begging, vagabondage, theft under £5, and other small felonies could be dealt with by lower officials in either a beadle court, manor court, town court, or petty sessions court. Usually these crimes were dealt with through a small fine or lower punishment like the stocks.
Elizabethan justice systems could be seen as very prejudiced by modern people. Punishment, accommodations, and cells while on trial were all dependent on your social status and/or wealth. Jails in Shakespeare's time had many different sections. Unlike today, these sections were based not on safety or the type of crime, rather they were based on how much money a prisoner could pay to live in the cell. Most poor people who were put into jail were put into the section called the hole. Keep in mind, many poor people were simply punished on the spot. The ones who received jail accommodations were usually waiting for their chance of punishment. The common hole in most jails put dozens of prisoners into a very small space with no availability to exercise, sanitation, or clean clothing. There was an extreme lack of food, as what was provided came through charities and was often rotten or unhealthy. Many of the poor died in these cells within days or weeks.
On the contrary, nobles who were in jail could buy their way to a high-class cell, purchase fine meals and clothing, as well as alcohol and tobacco. In fact, a noble with enough money could bribe their way out of jail completely. The higher class would stay in these conditions until they stopped paying enough money. Then they were moved into another area, which was still comfortable but less luxurious, and eventually ended up in the hole with the poor. Because jail times were not specific, meaning 2 people committing the same crime could get out of jail years apart, some nobles eventually ran out of ways to bribe the jail staff and were moved to the hole. Jails were often used as holding places for people awaiting trial or punishment, and if the court designated to the person's case was full in that session, the person remained in jail until they could plead.
There are many executions that took place in the Elizabethan era, as it was a regular form of punishment. There was the case of Anne Boleyn and her associates, Catherine Howard, Henry Howard, Thomas Cromwell, Lady Jane Grey, Jane Boleyn, and Mary Queen of Scots. All were very famous, but they were very controversial and problematic at the time. Bloody Mary, daughter of King Henry VIII, had also given many executions to the common people, as seen by her given title. Anne Boleyn was a young lady in waiting to King Henry VIII's wife when she stole his heart. He was married to Catherine of Aragon at the time, but he was dissatisfied as she did not produce the male heir that he had desired. In 1533, he married Anne and filed for divorce a year later. She didn't give him a son in the first few years of marriage and was very quickly enticed by Jane Seymour. Soon he formulated a plan with Thomas Cromwell, the head of the court, to get rid of Anne. They eventually accused her of adultery with several men, including her brother. However, the charge seemed to be false as there was no evidence to support the convictions. Unfortunately, Cromwell was the highest ranking in court, and she was later deemed guilty. Anne Boleyn was beheaded in May of 1536, along with the other people she was convicted of having sexual relations with. While King Henry VIII held the throne, he rejected the Pope and declared the Supremacy Act, which allowed him to be the leader of the Church. He also executed any subjects that went against his beliefs. King Henry VIII married Catherine Howard right after he divorced Anne of Cleves. He never really liked Anne, but he married her as the way to win favor with the people. Henry married the pretty Catherine 2 weeks after Anne was gone, and thought it would be a good fit as her family was influential in court. At the time, Henry was growing old, obese, and was becoming more repulsive. When word came out that she was having an affair with a young and handsome Thomas Culpeper, Henry was devastated. Howard was arrested, and she had to witness her lovers get executed. She was only 18 when she got executed for her crime. Jane Boleyn was also involved in the affair Catherine had with Thomas. She was the wife of George Boleyn and Boleyn's brother. However, she was not happy with their prearranged marriage. She was helpful in the arrest of her sister-in-law, Anne, and her husband in providing evidence to convict them. It was proven later that her allegations were completely false. Later, she encouraged Catherine to have the affair by setting up secret meetings. Her part was discovered, and she was interrogated and lost her sanity. A law was passed at the time to execute the insane, and she was beheaded as of February 13, 1542. Henry Howard's death came about when his competing family, the Seymours, had felt threatened. Howard was married to Jane Seymour, his third wife, until she died soon after their marriage. Later, there was talk of setting up marriage for Princess Mary. Two people were considered, Henry Howard and Jane's brother. Obviously, there was competition for the spot. The Seymours falsely made a rumor that Howard had supported the Catholics in the rebellion against the Supremacy Act in 1536. Howard had actually fought against the rebels, but due to this accusation, he was put into prison for 2 years. When he got out, he attempted to get revenge by causing trouble in a marriage between the two families. He even made various accusations, questioning the loyalties of the king. They were so infuriated with him that they made another statement about him supporting the Catholics, but this time made his sister testify against him. They convinced the king that Howard was up for his throne, and was in fact a devout Catholic. King Henry VIII did not need to be convinced any longer, and had him beheaded in 1547. Thomas Cromwell was the king's main advisor from 1532 to 1540, and is the one that succeeded in allowing the king's divorce. He started out being a politician, but eventually went up in ranks because he figured out a way to annul his marriage to Catherine without the Pope's permission, passing the Supremacy Act. He effectively brought down monasteries and removed Catholicism to England. Cromwell made a suggestion to Mary Anne of Cleves to increase his social status. Sadly, Henry VIII could not stand her, and had their marriage annulled almost instantly. Due to this failed marriage, Henry blamed it on Cromwell. His relationship with the king was already suffering, but when he had supported the Lutherans, it was the last straw. Cromwell had many enemies because he was a politician, so obviously people wanted to get rid of him. They used his support for them against him when they called for reform for the Catholic Church. He was beheaded in 1540 for heresy. Queen Mary reigned over England from 1533 to 1558, and she tried to return England to the Roman Catholic Church. She had to earn her position by executing Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant noble. During her reign, she had more than 300 people burned at the stake for heresy. She killed them because they interfered with her motives of restoring England back to its traditional faith. In Elizabeth I's reign, she had Mary Queen of Scots, executed because she was a threat to her throne. She was the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII, and would be the next in line after King Henry VIII's children. They tried to remove the threat by having her marry King Henry VIII's son, Edward, but the plan did not work out, and so she was sent to France to not cause any trouble. She returned to Scotland in 1561 to reign as queen to her subjects. She got married to Lord Darnley and had a son, but the following year he got murdered. In her attempt to maintain stability, she married the Scottish Earl of Bothwell, but that angered the population, so she fled to England. Unfortunately, Elizabeth got a hold of her and had her imprisoned for 19 years. Acting just like her father, Elizabeth had her executed, so she would no longer have to worry of her position being threatened. The fact that there was execution in the Elizabethan era proved that it was a dangerous place to live in at the time. It was better to not be associated to royalty, as they had so much power and authority. We should come to accept our own society's ways of crime and punishment, as there's less pain and deaths involved.